the one building wall. Oh, I should tell you about narcissism too. This is really interesting. If you look at the dreams of narcissistic people, this is my dad wrote about this. This is really fascinating. You will find dreams about them existing in a bubble, like where bubbles and walls and these kind of things are really, really, really common in the dreams of narcissistic people. And it can manifest also in stuff that they do out in the real world, right? So again, obsession with building a wall. You know the wall's now going to get built, $38 billion or whatever, $3.8 billion now being diverted from the military to build the wall, right? You know, $3.8 billion. I wonder how far that would go in paying for your college education.
Please don't.
You know, but very common. You know, building a wall, being a bubble. The Nazis were obsessed with living in bunkers. You know what a bunker is? It's like a walled underground fortress that, you know, walls you off from everybody and keeps you safe, right? Like a bubble, right? So, you know, Dr. Bushman has a whole lecture on bunker mentality of the Nazis, right? The Nazis were obsessed with bunkers. You can go to Berlin and you can go on a bunker tour of all the different bunkers they were building everywhere. And they had huge ones outside, you know, outside of the cities and stuff. And so, again, you know, this is a reflection of these narcissistic personalities, in my opinion, reflection of these narcissistic personalities. So this wall, dreams of walls, being in a bubble, these kind of things, very, very common in the unconscious imagery for narcissistic people. Yeah. Yes.
So do you think that that has to do a lot with that, like the desire for the self-preservation?
Yes. Yes, exactly what that is. Yes, exactly what this is. It's self-preservation, keeping the inside pumped up. You know, the balloon has to have a boundary around it, or it can't hold the air in, right? So the narcissist has to have a boundary around that narcissistic self, or it can't hold all that admiration that's being pumped in, right? If it leaks out, right, then, you know, they'll cease to exist, right? So it's very interesting. So Dr. Bushman and I we were talking about maybe doing a student trip to Germany and doing a bunker tour. We've talked about this, so I don't know if we'll ever end up doing it, but we've talked about it. It was really fun. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. I'll have to edit that into the video. All right.
Professor.
Yeah.
So you were saying how like narcissists need to like compensate
Yeah.
for something that happened in the past. Do you think is that like the same as the Napoleon complex?
Yeah. I mean, you could think of it that way. You know, the idea was that Napoleon was really super short, and so he compensated for it by, you know, being bossy and aggressive and being a good strategy guy. My understanding of that, I'm not a history person, so take this with a grain of salt. My understanding of that is Napoleon was probably average height for the time, because back in the day people were a lot shorter. You guys know about that? Back in the day people were a lot shorter. Why? Because their nutrition wasn't as good when they were kids, right? Nowadays, you know, you're getting good nutrition, drinking milk and eating meat, you know, and back in the day people were not as tall. Napoleon was probably average height, but there's probably something else in his background that he was compensating for. Whether he had narcissistic personality disorder or he had compensatory narcissism, I don't know. I do know there's a very good, actually my brother published it, a very good psychobiography of Napoleon. It's like huge, it's like 800 pages. I didn't read the whole thing, but it talks about this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, you know, but the idea that the commonly thought of Napoleon complex, yes, that could be a compensatory thing. Okay.
Dr. Colby.
Yeah.
Is that compensatory? Is the compensation like entirely based off of one instance of?
No, it could be based off one thing that was really, really traumatic, or it could be based off of a lot of smaller incidents. Usually, it's not one thing that has to, but it could be. You know, it could be. I mean, you know, you can think back in your own life and think if something happened. You know, like I think of my life when I was a kid, early on. And I think I was like 5 years old, 6 years old. I was in a really bad car accident, and I think probably some of the stuff I do nowadays compensates for that. Like I like to have really fast cars, you know, and I like to have really safe cars. And so I think some of that, you know, I look back, oh, that's someone compensating for something like that, you know, like, and you can think in your own life, you know, there may be things like that. It's not necessarily a narcissistic thing. We do compensation all the time for lots of different reasons. But if there's a wounding involved, then that can be, you know, I mean, the really common one is if you have divorced parents, you know, because a lot of us compensate for, you know, the kid feels like you know, the kid doesn't know, right? Especially if you're young. The kid thinks they were responsible for breaking the parents up, you know, so then they feelings of guilt and shame, and then they have to compensate for that in some way, shape, or form. That's a really common one. You see, if you're a therapist, you'll see that quite a bit. And there's lots of other ones like that. Any other questions about narcissism? It's an interesting subject, right? Hopefully, okay.